At True Echo, we bring you the realest stories you've never heard. True or not, they echo what matters. Today, witness how a 10-year-old girl shook a billion-dollar airline with just one seat and one phone call to her dad. This isn't just a flight story, it's a story about power, dignity, and the quiet strength that rewrites rules. My name is Ammani Jefferson. I'm 10 years old. And this is the story of how I learned what power really looks like, while sitting quietly in seat 2A. I had just finished a grueling 2-week science camp in Sacramento, one of those summer programs where you barely sleep because your brain is too busy dreaming of rockets and Mars rovers. I didn't mind. I loved it. And as a reward, my dad surprised me with something I'd never expected: my very first-class flight home. I still remember how the golden boarding pass felt in my hand that morning, like I was holding a little trophy. My dad, Christopher Jefferson, isn't the kind of man who throws gifts around for fun. He works hard, serious kind of hard. I've seen grown men stop mid-conversation just to shake his hand. So when he handed me that ticket, it meant something. The airport buzzed like a beehive when I reached the gate. I sat quietly at 34B, sneakers swinging under my seat, cradling my worn-out space book in my lap. It was the one Dad gave me when I was 5. Pages curled, corners dog-eared, and full of stardust dreams. When they called for first-class boarding, my heart leaped. I walked past the long economy line. People stared, some smiled, others just looked confused, like they didn't expect someone like me in the VIP lane. I smiled back anyway. Seat 2A. Window. Wide leather chair, a soft blanket folded just so, and even a little bowl of mints waiting in the side pocket. I sat down slowly, almost afraid I'd wake up and find it was all a dream. I pressed my hand into the cushion, softer than our living room couch. I was giddy. This moment felt like success. But it didn't last. 15 minutes later, a flight attendant walked up to me. Her voice was sugary sweet. Too sweet. The kind that makes you instantly suspicious, like the smile isn't for you but for a camera you can't see. "Sweetie," she said, "would you mind switching seats? We need a little extra room for a very important guest." I blinked. I wasn't in trouble. I knew that. But the way she said it? Like I was holding something I hadn't earned. I sat up straight the way Dad taught me. "I'd really like to stay," I said. Polite, firm, adult. She didn't like that. A second later, the smile snapped back into place. "We have a very important older passenger, someone who needs space. You're so smart, I know you understand." I shook my head again. "My dad bought me this seat," I whispered. Her smile faltered. She left. But she came back. Not alone. The second time she returned, a man in a navy suit was with her. His name tag said, Operations Supervisor, and he carried himself like someone who was used to not being questioned. He knelt down beside me like I was a toddler, not a paying passenger. "Good afternoon, young lady," he said in a rehearsed, almost robotic tone. "We're hoping you'll reconsider moving to another seat. It would really help us out." Help them out? By giving up the seat my dad worked for? The seat I earned with my hard work and his sacrifice? I clutched the seatbelt tight across my lap. "I already said no," I whispered. "I want to stay." He gave a smile that didn't touch his eyes, glanced at the flight attendant, and then crouched even lower. "You'll still get all the first-class perks," he added, like I was supposed to feel lucky. "Same service, same snacks. Just a different seat." Passengers were starting to look over now. I felt their eyes like heat on my skin. A woman 2 rows ahead turned in her seat. A man across the aisle whispered something under his breath. But no one spoke up. No one said, "Leave her alone." And then the line I'll never forget. "First class is typically reserved for adults," the flight attendant said with a soft laugh. "You're a child. You'll be more comfortable with the other kids." But there were no other kids. I had walked through every aisle. I saw every row. I knew there weren't any children on this flight besides me. So why was I the only one being asked to move? I felt the burn start in my chest, not from anger, not even sadness. It was something deeper. That feeling when you realize someone doesn't think you belong, and worse, they think you don't have the right to argue. Still, I didn't budge. "I'd like to stay," I repeated, my voice small but steady. The supervisor stood. His jaw tightened. "If you can't move on your own," he said coolly, "we'll have to reseat you ourselves to avoid delays." That was the moment I froze. Reseat me? Like I was cargo? Like I wasn't even a person with a name? I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I didn't think. I just texted, "Daddy, help. They want me to give up my seat. Won't leave me alone. Please hurry." I hit send and stared down at the screen. I didn't even know if he was near his phone. My mouth was dry. My heart pounded in my ears. The crew stepped away again. I sat like a statue. 2 minutes. 3. My phone buzzed. Christopher Jefferson, stay calm. Do not move. I'm handling it. Another buzz. Christopher Jefferson, do they know who you are yet? They're about to. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I didn't have to. All I needed to know was that Dad was on it, and that meant everything. I slipped the phone under my thigh and folded my hands in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But around me the world shifted. The man in the suit, who minutes ago had spoken with power in every word, now fidgeted. The flight attendant was glancing toward the cockpit, her confidence unraveling. Another staff member whispered into her ear. Her expression changed. A different flight attendant, one I hadn't seen before, came down the aisle fast and quiet, leaned in close to the suited man and said something I couldn't hear. But I saw the color drain from his face. The pilot's voice came over the speaker again. Folks, we'll be experiencing a slight delay as we complete some final checks. My phone buzzed again. Christopher Jefferson, you're doing perfect. They're trying to figure out how deep they're in it. Another buzz. Christopher Jefferson, just got off the phone with the COO. He knows your name now. And mine. I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about all the other times someone had been told they didn't belong. This was about people who weren't given a voice. Who were expected to just give up, sit down, and disappear quietly. I looked out the window again. I wasn't disappearing. I didn't know how long I sat there, but time had stopped meaning anything. All I could hear were the hushed whispers between the crew, the murmur of unsettled passengers, and the steady thump of my heart as I stared down at my hands, trying not to shake. Then footsteps. The suited man was back. But everything about him had changed. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crouching down to my level anymore either. He was slightly hunched, his voice lower now, trembling at the edges. Miss Jefferson, he began, not sweetie or honey this time, there's been a misunderstanding. Of course you can remain in your seat. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. For a moment I just blinked at him. My heart was still racing and my brain couldn't quite catch up with what had just happened. I had been told to move. Pressured. Dismissed. Nearly dragged. And now I was being called Miss Jefferson? I nodded slowly. That was all I could manage. He stood quickly, as if relieved I wasn't going to say anything else, and made his way to the front of the plane where the other flight crew had gathered. They were arguing now, quiet but sharp. Their faces were pale, panicked, and suddenly much less sure of themselves. Passengers were watching. I wasn't the only one who noticed the change. Someone behind me muttered, I thought they were going to kick her off. Another voice whispered, something's going on. My phone buzzed again. Christopher Jefferson, you'll see a few people leave. Stay calm. Nothing you did was wrong. Remember that. Sure enough, within minutes, the man in the suit, the first flight attendant, and 2 other crew members collected their things, quick, quiet, and tight-lipped. They walked off the plane one by one, each step heavy like they were marching to their own execution. The plane door thudded closed behind them. A new crew walked on. No fanfare. No announcements. Just a quiet reset like none of it had happened. But we all knew. Everyone on that plane knew. I leaned back in my seat as the new attendant handed out welcome drinks. My hands were still a little shaky, but I managed to sip. The coolness of the apple juice grounded me. I caught a few glances from fellow passengers, some with curiosity, some with quiet respect. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew enough. The plane finally began to taxi, and the pilot's voice came over the speaker again. He sounded different this time, more careful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're ready for takeoff. We soared into the sky. Up there, among the clouds, I realized something. That seat I fought for, it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about first class or being treated fairly or even about race, though all of that mattered. It was about claiming space, knowing your worth, saying no when everyone expects you to fold. When the plane landed in San Diego hours later, I felt taller. Not because I'd grown, but because I had stood my ground, and no one had moved me. The sliding doors of the airport opened, and there he was. My dad. He was waiting just past baggage claim, arms wide open, suit jacket tossed over one shoulder. The moment I saw him, my backpack hit the floor. I ran into his arms and he scooped me up like I was still 5 years old. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. He just held me, one hand gently smoothing my braids, the same way he used to do when I was scared of thunderstorms. When he finally pulled back, he looked me in the eye and said, You stood your ground. And in that moment, hearing those 4 simple words, I realized how much I needed to hear them. I'm proud of you, he said. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I didn't cry on that plane. I wouldn't give them that. But now, with my dad beside me, I let myself feel everything I had swallowed down for hours. I didn't say much during the ride home. Neither did he. The car was quiet except for the hum of the road and the soft jazz playing through the speakers. I stared out the window as the freeway lights blurred past, and my brain played everything back like a movie reel on loop. Then quietly I asked, "Dad, why me?" He glanced at me, his fingers drumming the wheel. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see," he said. "They saw a kid. They saw someone they thought didn't belong." He paused, turned his eyes back to the road. "But you're not small, Ammani. You're never small. When someone treats you like you are, when they try to make you feel invisible, you stay rooted. You don't let them shrink you." His voice was calm, strong, like a drumbeat I could walk to. I nodded slowly. And in my heart, I knew I hadn't just held on to a seat. I'd claimed my place in the world. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my name being shouted, on TV. I blinked sleep out of my eyes and stumbled toward the living room, rubbing my arm where I'd curled it too tightly under my cheek. Dad was already awake, standing in front of the big screen with his arms folded and his phone buzzing like it was alive. On the television, a news anchor spoke fast, her tone clipped with urgency. Viral video from yesterday's flight out of Sacramento has sparked national outrage after a young girl, later identified as Ammani Jefferson, was reportedly asked to give up her first-class seat for an adult passenger. The situation escalated until her father, CEO Christopher Jefferson, became involved, resulting in multiple airline employees being dismissed before the flight even departed. My legs turned to jelly. Someone had filmed it? I hadn't even noticed. But now it was everywhere. The footage was shaky, taken from behind a headrest, but you could see me clearly, sitting still, hands folded, eyes wide. You could hear the flight attendant's voice too. See the man in the suit leaning over me. The tension in their body language. The way mine never wavered. The video cut off just before they backed down. But that was enough. Dad's phone buzzed again. Then again. And again. Reporters. Activists. Airline executives. People he hadn't spoken to in years were calling, texting, emailing. Some were outraged. Some were nervous. Some just wanted to know what he planned to do next. He finally turned toward me. "You okay?" I nodded, then shook my head. "I didn't want this," I whispered. "I just wanted to read my book and go home." "I know, sweetheart." He crouched beside me. "But you stood for something bigger than a seat. And people saw it." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I wanted to be seen like that. But then the doorbell rang. Dad opened it, and standing there was Ms. Eliza, my 5th grade teacher from last year, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. "I just had to come by," she said breathlessly. "You were incredible. And brave. And I want my students to see this. To know they can take up space too." I blinked back tears. Later that day the letters started coming. Handwritten notes. Emails. Posts online. Strangers writing things like, "My daughter watched your story and said she wants to be just like you." Or, "I wish someone had stood their ground for me when I was 10. One email from a teacher in Alabama read, "You gave my whole classroom a lesson in dignity today. And you didn't even speak a word." But not everyone was kind. There were comments too. The ones people leave when they think a screen protects them. Words I didn't understand but knew were meant to hurt. People calling me entitled, saying I should have moved, that it was just a seat. Dad tried to shield me from them. But I saw some. And they stung. That night after dinner, Dad sat me down and asked me a question I didn't expect. "Do you want to say something? Publicly, I mean. You don't have to. But if you want to speak to explain, it's your right." I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want people pointing or whispering when I walked into a room. I just wanted to be a girl who liked rockets and stars. But then I remembered the flight attendant's voice. The way she spoke to me like I didn't matter. Like I was invisible. And I remembered how I didn't move. I looked at my dad and said, "Yes. I want to say something." The next day, a small press room at Dad's office was filled with cameras and lights. I wore a simple white dress. No makeup. No flash. Just me. I stepped up to the mic, heart pounding so hard I was sure the microphone would catch it. "I was taught," I began, voice shaking slightly, "that if you earn your seat, you don't have to move for anyone. Not because you're young. Not because you look different. Not because someone says you don't belong." I paused. People blinked back, tears in the audience. "If you worked for it, It's yours. You stay. I took a breath and finished. You don't have to shout to take up space. You don't have to fight ugly to fight back. Sometimes standing your ground quietly can be louder than any voice in the room. And sometimes, it opens the door for the next person behind you. I looked straight into the lens. And I didn't blink. After the press conference, everything moved like a tornado. The clip of my speech, just 57 seconds long, exploded across the internet. It hit 1 million views by noon. By dinner time, I was being called the little giant by anchors and influencers alike. People weren't just reposting it, they were reacting to it, reflecting on it, teaching from it. Classrooms played it on projectors. Churches mentioned it in sermons. Celebrities quoted it. A teacher from Boston emailed to say her students created a "You Belong" wall, each kid writing a time they stood their ground. A mother in Detroit said her daughter refused to let a classmate skip her in line for lunch because Ammani didn't give up her seat and I'm not giving up my spot. It was surreal. Dad kept me grounded. This spotlight is just light, he said. What matters is what you do with it. So I tried. Every time someone invited me to speak, I asked, will there be kids in the room? I didn't care about talking to adults in suits. I wanted to talk to kids who were still learning their worth, because sometimes, they're the first to be told they don't have any. But as the praise grew louder, the silence from the airline became deafening. For a week they ignored everything. No public apology. No policy change. Just PR fluff. We are reviewing the incident. We value all our customers. But people didn't forget. And they didn't forgive. Then something incredible happened. A woman I didn't know reached out to my dad. She said she worked for the airline mid-level management. She wasn't supposed to say anything, but she was a mother too. She sent us screenshots, internal memos, meeting notes, and one damning email from a senior flight operations director, dated the night of my flight. Situation neutralized. Child moved. Minor disruption. Crew followed protocol. But I had never moved. The email was a lie. Dad forwarded it to his lawyers. The next day, our lawyer called a press conference of their own. In it, my dad stood behind a podium, not as a CEO, not as a client, but as a father. And he read the email aloud. When he finished, he looked straight into the cameras and said, my daughter was harassed, gaslit, and nearly humiliated for daring to sit where she belonged. The company didn't just fail her. It lied about her. And that's unacceptable. That moment changed everything. By morning, stockholders were calling for action. Shares dipped. Executives scrambled. And finally the airline blinked. They issued a full-page apology in 3 major newspapers. They fired 6 senior staff members, including the flight director. They rewrote their seating policy to explicitly include age, race, and protected rights. They even asked us, me, to help consult on youth inclusion training. Dad asked me what I wanted to do. I said yes, but only if it was real. So, 2 weeks later, I walked into a giant conference room filled with people 3, 4, 5 times my age, and told them what it felt like to be 10 years old in a seat you were told wasn't yours. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. And when I finished, not a single person looked away. But still, the part one loved most was going back to being just Ammani. Science Camp called me back for a fall project showcase, and I finally got to present the rocket engine prototype I'd been sketching for months. I wore jeans, a t-shirt, and a space-themed hairband. No cameras. No reporters. Just me, my rocket, and a room full of curious minds. One little girl came up after and whispered, I saw your video. My big sister told me you're like a superhero. I grinned. Nah, I said. I'm just a girl who stayed in her seat. She beamed. I'm gonna do that too. And that mattered more than any headline. By the end of that month, my life had become a kind of before and after. Before the flight, I was just a space-obsessed kid who liked to build things and read under the covers with a flashlight. After, I was being asked to speak at youth summits, invited to participate in think tanks, even mentioned on late-night TV shows. One host called me, the kid who sat down so hard the entire airline industry had to stand up. But through it all, I stayed grounded. Mostly because my dad made sure I didn't forget who I was. One night, I asked him, why do you think it became such a big deal? He set down his cup of tea and leaned back. Because you reminded people of something they forgot, he said. That dignity doesn't ask permission. It doesn't come with age or titles or status. You showed them that a little girl could hold it and protect it better than some grown-ups ever do. He paused. And because you didn't get loud to be heard. You got still. That hit me hard. Because all I had done, really, was stay in my seat. But I guess sometimes the simplest acts can echo the loudest. Things kept moving fast. My story was turned into a children's book. Seat 2A, The Girl Who Wouldn't Move. The publisher let me write the last page myself. You're allowed to take up space. Especially when you earned it. That line still gives me chills. A group of college students in Atlanta started a campaign called Claim Your Seat, encouraging kids from underrepresented communities to apply for advanced summer programs. They told me I was their inspiration. I told them I was just trying to make my dad proud. They said I already had. Then, out of nowhere, something I hadn't expected happened. I got a letter. Not an email. Not a DM. A real, honest-to-goodness letter. Handwritten. Neat cursive. On thick ivory paper. It was from the daughter of the woman who had tried to take my seat. She wrote that her mother had come home from that flight furious, but hadn't told the full story. That it wasn't until the news broke and video surfaced that her daughter understood what really happened. She was ashamed, the letter said. Not because she didn't get the seat, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to see a kid and think, less than. She asked me to say sorry. And I wanted to say thank you. Because you didn't humiliate her. You just refused to disappear. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it and tucked it inside my space book, the same one I held that day in the airport. It felt right keeping it there. Because sometimes the biggest changes don't come from yelling. They come from sitting still long enough to be undeniable. That winter, I was invited to the state education conference to speak about youth empowerment. The hall was massive, 3 stories high, all glass and light. I was the only speaker under 18. I wore a navy blazer and small gold hoops like Mom used to wear, and when I stepped up to the mic, the whole room went silent. I took a deep breath. I was told I was too small to matter. Too young to stay in a seat my father paid for. Too black to belong in a space they thought wasn't meant for me. I looked up, scanning the crowd. But here's the truth. If someone tries to move you from a place you earned, it says more about them than it does about you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay planted. The silence held for a second longer. Then the room erupted. That night, I didn't stay for the fancy dinner or the press photos. I went home. Sat on the floor in my room. Took out my journal and wrote, Dear future me, don't ever forget what Seat 2A taught you. That your worth doesn't shrink to fit someone else's comfort. That standing your ground can be quiet. And that dignity doesn't need permission. Months passed. The noise died down as it always does. The trending tags faded. The media moved on. But something deeper stayed behind, like a root quietly growing. I went back to school. Back to homework, science fairs, and spelling tests. Back to giggling with friends over cafeteria pizza and arguing over which planet was coolest. It's Saturn, obviously. Life felt normal again. And that, honestly, was the biggest gift of all. But every now and then someone would stop me. At a gas station. In the hallway. At the library. Are you the girl from the plane? At first it made me nervous. I didn't know what to say. But soon I learned to smile and answer, I'm Ammani. Because that's what this was about in the end. Not fame. Not a viral moment. Not even about justice exactly. It was about remembering I had a name and a voice. One Saturday, I was sitting at the kitchen table working on a solar system model for my science class. Dad was at the stove, humming some old Motown song, flipping pancakes like a pro. He turned and looked at me, really looked like he was memorizing the moment. You good? He asked. I smiled. I'm good. He nodded slowly. You still thinking about everything? I paused. Sometimes. And it was true. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about how close I came to giving in. To shrinking. To sliding back into the background so I didn't cause trouble. So I didn't make waves. And then I'd remember how I didn't. Because I knew, deep down, that giving up that seat would have meant giving up more than just a view out the window. It would have meant giving up myself. Then came the interview request from a major global magazine. They wanted to do a special piece on voices of the next generation. Kids shaping the future. I didn't want to be part of it at first. I was tired. I was 12 now. I just wanted to build rockets. But Dad said something that changed my mind. Someone out there is one yes away from believing they belong. Maybe you're their yes. So I said okay. In the article they asked me, if you could say one thing to other kids who feel small, what would it be? This was my answer. You're allowed to take up space. Even if someone tells you not to. Even if their smile says yes, but their eyes say no. Even if they ask nicely. If you earned it, it's yours. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to move to make peace. You can sit. You can stay. And that can be the strongest thing you ever do. And now, well, now I'm just me again. Still reading. Still building. Still dreaming of rockets. But if I ever fly first class again, and someone leans down and asks, would you mind moving for someone more important? I'll look up, smile and say, I am important. That's why I'm here. And this time, the world might just believe me. At True Echo, we believe stories like Ammani's don't just make headlines, they change hearts. Her courage reminds us that dignity doesn't shout, it simply refuses to vanish. This story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Stand up, or sit firm, for someone else's right to belong. Subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful stories that echo far beyond the moment. Comment your thoughts below. What would you have done in Seat 2A? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. You don't need permission to belong.